For months, Buckingham Palace has worked carefully to reassure the public that King Charles remains committed to carrying out his constitutional duties despite his ongoing cancer treatment. Official statements have consistently emphasized stability, continuity, and determination. But this summer, one announcement quietly changed the tone of that entire conversation. The palace revealed that the king had paused part of his cancer treatment. Not ended it. Not completed it. Paused it. At first glance, that may sound like a routine medical adjustment. Yet royal watchers know that every word released by Buckingham Palace is chosen with extraordinary care. In moments like these, even a single word can trigger weeks of analysis because the monarchy rarely says more than it absolutely intends to say. At almost the same time, Prince Harry unexpectedly returned to the United Kingdom for events connected to the Invictus Games. Reports also began circulating that Princess Catherine had privately reached out to Harry in what some royal commentators described as a warmer gesture than anyone expected. None of these developments, taken alone, necessarily signal a major turning point. But together, they have prompted renewed questions about whether the royal family is entering a new chapter behind closed doors. Is this simply a series of unrelated events unfolding at the same time? Or could King Charles's health be quietly influencing decisions that have remained frozen for years? Today, we're examining the facts, separating confirmed information from reported claims, and exploring why so many experienced royal observers believe this summer feels different from the ones that came before. To understand why every recent royal headline has attracted so much attention, we have to go back to the moment when the relationship between Prince Harry and the rest of the royal family changed forever. When Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties in 2020, the announcement shocked not only Britain but audiences around the world. It wasn't simply a family disagreement. It became a constitutional and public relations challenge for one of the world's oldest institutions. Their decision marked the beginning of years of interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and public statements that exposed tensions which had previously remained behind palace walls. From Buckingham Palace's perspective, the priority became preserving stability. The monarchy has always depended on the appearance of continuity, regardless of personal disagreements. Public emotions inside the family are rarely allowed to overshadow the institution itself. That is why official statements have often been brief, carefully worded, and intentionally restrained. For Harry, however, the years that followed looked very different. He repeatedly spoke about feeling unsupported during some of the most difficult periods of his life. Security became one of his biggest concerns after stepping away from official royal duties, and he argued publicly that the protection available to him had changed in ways that affected his family's ability to visit the United Kingdom safely. The issue eventually became the subject of lengthy legal proceedings and widespread public debate. Meanwhile, Prince William adopted a noticeably different approach. Unlike Harry, William has rarely addressed family disagreements publicly. Instead, he has continued focusing on official engagements, constitutional responsibilities, and preparations for the role he will one day inherit. Royal commentators have often described his strategy as one of discipline rather than reaction, allowing the institution to speak louder than personal responses. Princess Catherine also became an important figure in this changing dynamic. Throughout the years of public disagreement, she maintained a consistent public image, avoiding direct comment while continuing her royal responsibilities. Because of that approach, many royal observers came to view her as one of the family's most steady and trusted figures. Whether that perception is entirely accurate or not, it has shaped how many people interpret reports involving her. Then another unexpected challenge arrived. Early in 2024, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. Although the palace chose not to disclose the specific type of cancer, the announcement immediately shifted public attention away from family disagreements and toward the king's health. For many observers, the diagnosis changed the emotional landscape. Disagreements that once dominated headlines suddenly seemed less important than the well-being of the monarch himself. Questions about succession, long-term planning, and the future direction of the monarchy naturally became more prominent, even though the palace repeatedly emphasized that the king intended to continue fulfilling his constitutional duties wherever possible. Throughout the following months, Charles continued attending official engagements whenever his medical team considered it appropriate. Every public appearance was carefully watched, not only for what he said, but for how he looked, how long he remained at events, and whether his schedule appeared lighter than before. Royal correspondents began paying closer attention to details that previously might have gone unnoticed. How energetic did he appear? Was he walking comfortably? How many engagements was he completing each week? Did the palace describe his health differently than it had before? These small observations became part of a much larger conversation because the public naturally wanted reassurance that the king remained capable of fulfilling his role while undergoing treatment. Against that backdrop, every development involving Prince Harry took on additional significance. Whenever Harry visited Britain, attention immediately shifted toward one question. Would father and son meet? Sometimes the answer appeared to be yes. Sometimes reports suggested the meetings were brief. Other times, there was no confirmed meeting at all. Because both Buckingham Palace and Harry's representatives rarely discuss private family conversations, much of the public conversation has relied on reporting from experienced royal correspondents rather than official confirmation. That uncertainty has created an environment where every reported meeting, every rumored letter, and every carefully worded palace statement becomes the subject of intense analysis. Now, as King Charles continues managing his illness while carrying out his constitutional responsibilities, many observers believe the situation has entered a different phase, not because the palace has announced a dramatic change, but because several separate developments have arrived within a relatively short period. A reported pause in treatment. Prince Harry's visit to Britain. Renewed speculation about private communication within the family. And growing discussion among experienced royal commentators about what the coming years may look like. Whether these events ultimately lead to meaningful reconciliation or simply represent another chapter in an already complicated family story remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The next developments will likely be watched more closely than anything the royal family has experienced since Harry and Meghan first stepped away from royal life. The turning point in this story did not begin with a dramatic speech or an emotional public appearance. Instead, it began with a single update from Buckingham Palace, one that sounded routine on the surface, but immediately caught the attention of experienced royal correspondents. The palace confirmed that King Charles had paused part of his cancer treatment for a period while continuing to carry out selected public duties. Officially, it was presented as a medical scheduling decision, and the palace did not suggest that the king's overall condition had dramatically changed. Still, royal commentators noted that every statement about the monarch's health is drafted with exceptional care, meaning even subtle wording is examined closely. Importantly, a pause in treatment does not by itself reveal why doctors made that recommendation. There are many possible medical reasons for adjusting or pausing treatment, and only the king and his medical team know the full picture. That uncertainty is exactly why the announcement generated so much discussion. Only days later, attention shifted again. Prince Harry arrived in the United Kingdom for events connected to the Invictus Games. On paper, it looked like another routine visit centered on the charity that has remained one of the most important parts of Harry's public life. But several details immediately stood out. He traveled without Meghan. He appeared focused almost entirely on veterans and Invictus-related engagements. And as many commentators pointed out, this visit looked very different from the highly publicized appearances that had defined previous years. For some observers, that raised an obvious question. Had Harry come only for Invictus, or had the timing of his visit also created an opportunity for private family conversations? Reports soon began suggesting that Harry and King Charles may have spent more time together than they had during some previous visits. Buckingham Palace did not publicly discuss any private meeting, and Harry's representatives also remained silent. Without official confirmation, it is impossible to know exactly what, if anything, was discussed behind closed doors. Yet the speculation continued because timing matters in royal stories. A king's health update. A son's return to Britain. Renewed reports of private communication. Even without official comment, Those events naturally encouraged questions about whether circumstances inside the family were beginning to change. At the same time, another reported development added even more intrigue. Several media outlets claimed that Princess Catherine had privately reached out to Prince Harry in a personal letter or message. The reports described the communication as warm and respectful, though neither Buckingham Palace nor Kensington Palace confirmed the claims. That distinction is important. Reported correspondence is not the same as confirmed correspondence. However, when similar reports appear from multiple outlets, they often become part of the wider public conversation, even while remaining unverified. If such communication did occur, many royal observers believe it could represent something significant. Not necessarily a reconciliation. Not necessarily a return to old relationships. But perhaps a recognition that family conversations become more important during periods of serious illness. Others disagree entirely. Some analysts argue that nothing meaningful has changed at all. They point out that Harry remains outside the working royal family, that official responsibilities have not been restored, and that there has been no public indication of a major shift in Prince William's position regarding the long-running family disagreements. In other words, two very different interpretations now exist at the same time. One view sees small signs of cautious progress. The other sees ordinary events being connected into a larger narrative without enough evidence to support that conclusion. That disagreement is what makes this moment so fascinating. Because unlike many previous royal controversies, there is remarkably little confirmed information available. Instead, the conversation has been shaped by careful palace wording, experienced royal correspondence, unnamed sources, and the visible timing of several important events. And then another question quietly emerged. If King Charles is continuing to perform his duties while managing cancer treatment, how might that affect long-term planning for the monarchy? No one inside Buckingham Palace has suggested that any immediate constitutional changes are coming. Charles remains king, continues carrying out official responsibilities, and the palace has consistently emphasized continuity. But serious illness inevitably causes people, both inside and outside an institution, to think further ahead than they otherwise might. That reality has placed renewed attention on Prince William, the future of the monarchy, and the unresolved relationship between two brothers. Whether that attention ultimately leads to genuine healing or simply another chapter of speculation remains unknown. But as the summer continues, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The headlines may be about health updates and official engagements. The real story everyone is trying to understand is what, if anything, is changing behind palace doors. As speculation surrounding King Charles's health continued to grow, another conversation quietly began taking shape among royal commentators, and it had less to do with the king's current duties than with the future of the monarchy itself. Whenever a reigning monarch faces a serious illness, attention naturally turns to succession planning. That doesn't mean a transition is imminent. In fact, Buckingham Palace has repeatedly emphasized that King Charles remains committed to carrying out his constitutional role. But institutions like the monarchy are always preparing for the future, regardless of the present circumstances. That is where Prince William enters the picture. For years, William has maintained a consistent public approach. While Harry has spoken openly through interviews, documentaries, and his memoir, William has largely avoided discussing family disputes in public. Instead, he is focused on official engagements, his charitable work, and the responsibilities associated with being the heir to the throne. Many royal observers believe that strategy has been deliberate. The future king is expected to project stability rather than emotion. Whether that approach has helped or hurt private family relationships is something only those involved truly know. Recently, however, renewed media reports have suggested that William may take a firmer approach toward the structure of the royal family once he eventually becomes king. Various newspapers and commentators have discussed possibilities ranging from a smaller working monarchy to changes involving titles or official roles for non-working royals. It is important to make a clear distinction here. These discussions remain speculation unless officially announced. No formal plans have been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, or Prince William's office. While newspapers frequently report on possible future decisions, those reports should not be treated as established fact. Even so, the conversation itself reveals something important. Public attention is no longer focused only on today's royal events. People are increasingly asking what the monarchy could look like 5 or 10 years from now. That shift in focus has created another layer of uncertainty. If King Charles hopes to improve personal relationships within his family, would there be enough time? If William eventually inherits the throne with existing disagreements still unresolved, would those relationships become even more difficult to repair? No one outside the family can answer those questions. But they explain why every reported meeting between Charles and Harry attracts so much attention. For many commentators, those meetings are no longer viewed simply as conversations between father and son. They are viewed through the lens of history. Then there is another factor that cannot be ignored: public perception. Over the past several years, every interaction involving the royal family has been analyzed through social media, television coverage, newspaper commentary, and millions of online discussions. One photograph, one handshake, one shared glance. Those moments often generate thousands of headlines within hours. That level of scrutiny makes genuine reconciliation incredibly complicated. If Harry and William were seen speaking privately tomorrow, some people would immediately celebrate a breakthrough. Others would dismiss it as a carefully managed public relations exercise. In today's media environment, almost every royal appearance carries two separate stories: the event itself and the interpretation of the event. That may be why Buckingham Palace has continued saying so little. Historically, the institution has preferred actions over explanations. Rather than responding to every rumor, it often allows time to answer questions that public statements cannot. Whether that strategy remains effective in the age of social media is another debate entirely. Meanwhile, Prince Harry continues to occupy a unique position. Although he no longer serves as a working royal, his connection to the royal family ensures that almost every visit to Britain becomes international news. Invictus remains one of his most respected achievements, and many observers believe it represents the area where his public work receives the broadest support across different audiences. That made his recent UK visit particularly interesting. The focus remained largely on veterans rather than family disagreements. For a brief moment, attention shifted away from controversy and back toward the charitable mission that originally defined much of Harry's public image. Some commentators viewed that as a positive development. Others argued that private family questions inevitably overshadowed everything else. And perhaps that is the central challenge facing everyone involved. No matter how carefully official engagements are planned, unresolved family relationships continue to dominate public discussion. As the summer progresses, the number of unanswered questions appears to be growing rather than shrinking. Has communication between family members genuinely improved? Or are isolated events being interpreted as evidence of reconciliation before any real change has taken place? Has King Charles's health altered the emotional priority? Is the royal family quietly moving toward reconciliation? Or are people simply seeing hope where none exists? The answer depended largely on who is interpreting the story. Supporters of King Charles argued that the king's focus has always been duty first. Even while undergoing cancer treatment, he has continued attending carefully selected engagements, meeting world leaders, and carrying out constitutional responsibilities whenever possible. To them, the palace's messaging reflected resilience rather than crisis. Others looked at the situation differently. They pointed out that serious illness naturally changes priorities for any family, regardless of status or title. Whether someone is a king or an ordinary citizen, facing a long-term medical condition often encourages difficult conversations that might otherwise be postponed for years. That human reality made every reported interaction between Charles and Harry seem more significant. Meanwhile, Prince William remained publicly focused on his own responsibilities. There were no emotional interviews, no public statements addressing speculation, no visible attempt to respond to the daily headlines. For many royal analysts, that silence was entirely consistent with William's long-established approach. Throughout the past several years, he has generally allowed official engagements to speak louder than personal commentary. Princess Catherine adopted the same strategy. Despite widespread reports about a possible private message to Harry, there was no official confirmation and no public discussion from Kensington Palace. That silence left plenty of room for speculation. Some interpreted it as quiet diplomacy. Others believed it demonstrated nothing at all. Without confirmation, every conclusion remained only an interpretation. At the same time, Prince Harry faced renewed public scrutiny. His supporters argued that traveling to Britain for the Invictus community demonstrated his ongoing commitment to veterans regardless of family tensions. His critics, however, questioned whether years of public disagreements had already caused lasting damage that could not easily be repaired. Once again, public opinion became deeply divided. Social media reflected that division almost immediately. One side celebrated the possibility that father and son might finally be rebuilding trust. The other insisted there was still no concrete evidence that anything meaningful had changed behind palace walls. Perhaps the most interesting reaction came from experienced royal correspondents. Rather than making dramatic predictions, many adopted a noticeably cautious tone. Instead of declaring that reconciliation was underway, they emphasized uncertainty. Instead of promising a breakthrough, they reminded audiences that private family relationships are rarely visible from the outside. That restraint is worth noticing. Royal reporting has always relied on balancing official information with informed observation. Experienced correspondents understand that appearances can sometimes suggest progress while reality remains unchanged. The royal family itself has demonstrated that distinction many times throughout history. A shared appearance does not automatically mean a healed relationship. A private meeting does not necessarily resolve years of disagreement. And a carefully worded palace statement often raises as many questions as it answers. That is why this particular moment feels so unusual. Not because there is definitive proof that everything is changing, but because there is just enough movement to make people wonder if change is finally possible. Another important factor is public expectation. Over the past few years, every rumored reconciliation has generated enormous headlines, only for reality to prove far more complicated. As a result, many longtime royal observers have become increasingly skeptical. They prefer to judge developments by actions rather than anonymous reports. Until they see repeated public signs of improved relationships, they remain cautious about declaring any major turning point. That skepticism is understandable. History has shown that family relationships, especially those lived under constant public scrutiny, rarely follow a straight path. Progress can happen. Setbacks can happen just as quickly. For King Charles, however, time has introduced a new element into that equation. While the palace continues emphasizing that he remains active as monarch, his cancer diagnosis inevitably reminds everyone that some opportunities cannot be postponed forever. That reality gives every family interaction greater emotional weight. Not because anyone knows what will happen next, but because no one knows how much time remains for unresolved relationships to evolve naturally. And perhaps that is why this summer has attracted so much attention. The story is no longer just about royal protocol. It is about family, about illness, about forgiveness, about responsibility, and about whether people separated by years of public disagreement can still find common ground when circumstances begin changing around them. Whether that happens remains uncertain, but the coming months may reveal far more than official statements ever could. By the end of this summer, the biggest story may not be if private conversations between King Charles and Prince Harry have become more frequent. Only those involved know whether they have made any real difference. If reports about Catherine reaching out privately are accurate, only the family knows what was said. If Prince William's long-term vision for the monarchy is already taking shape, those plans remain private until officially announced. For now, much of the public conversation exists in the space between confirmed information and informed speculation. And that space is where royal stories often become the most fascinating. There is another reality that cannot be ignored. Cancer changes how families think about time. It doesn't automatically solve disagreements. It doesn't erase years of hurt. But serious illness often reminds people that opportunities for difficult conversations are limited. That truth applies to every family, not only royal ones. Whether those conversations are happening behind palace walls is something the public simply cannot know. What we do know is that King Charles has continued showing remarkable commitment to his role despite an extremely challenging personal situation. We also know that Prince Harry continues returning to Britain for causes that remain deeply important to him. And we know that the world's attention has never fully left this family because every appearance, every statement, and every reported meeting immediately becomes international news. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about the royal family is the belief that every answer eventually becomes public. History suggests otherwise. Some of the institution's most important conversations are never confirmed. Some disagreements are quietly managed rather than publicly resolved. And some relationships evolve slowly, far away from television cameras and newspaper headlines. That is why predictions should always be treated carefully. Many reports over the past several years have suggested breakthroughs that never materialized. Others dismissed important developments that later proved significant. Only time separates speculation from history. For now, King Charles remains on the throne. Prince William remains the heir. Prince Harry remains outside the working royal family while continuing his independent public work. Those facts have not changed. The question is whether the relationships behind those public roles are beginning to change in ways that have not yet become visible. That answer will not come from rumors. It will come from actions, from future meetings, from future appearances, and from the choices each member of the family makes in the months ahead. Because in the end, the future of this story may depend less on royal titles or public ceremonies, and more on whether father and his sons decide that some conversations are simply too important to leave unfinished. If you found this analysis balanced and insightful, let me know what you think. Do you believe these recent developments are the first signs of genuine progress within the royal family? Or do you think the headlines are creating a bigger story than the facts currently support? Share your perspective in the comments. I read them all, and thoughtful discussions often inspire future videos. If you enjoy well-researched royal analysis that separates confirmed facts from speculation, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.